The last words my brother said to me were, "You're nothing but worthless dead weight." I didn't respond. Not because I was hurt, though I was, but because his words no longer had power over me. They hung in the air at that dinner table while everyone pretended not to hear. Then 5 minutes later, the CEO stood up, tapped his glass, and said 7 words that changed everything. "Meet Emily Parker, my new managing partner." And suddenly, the brother who'd spent years trying to bury me was staring at his own grave. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The restaurant buzzed with the kind of energy that comes with expensive wine and power suits. Chandeliers hung overhead, casting warm light on faces I'd known my entire life, and some I'd only met through LinkedIn profiles and industry magazines. My parents sat across from me, my father's expression unreadable as always, my mother nervously adjusting her pearls every few minutes. And then there was Derek, my older brother, seated directly opposite me, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he already owned the room. I'd been avoiding family dinners for nearly 2 years. Not because I was busy, though that was the excuse I'd perfected. The truth was simpler and more painful. I couldn't stand watching my family orbit around Derek like planets around their sun. Every conversation inevitably curved back to his accomplishments, his insights, his future. I was just the afterthought, the footnote, the sister who wasn't quite measuring up. But this dinner was unavoidable. My father's 60th birthday had collided with Derek's 5-year anniversary at Horizon Ventures, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country. The celebration was supposed to honor both, but I knew from the moment I arrived who the real star of the evening was. "Emily, you managed to tear yourself away from whatever it is you're doing these days," Derek said as I took my seat, his smile never reaching his eyes. "What is it again?" "Some kind of startup consulting?" I smoothed my dress, a simple black number that had cost me more than I wanted to admit. Digital transformation for established businesses, actually. Helping companies evolve their business models for the modern economy. "Sounds fancy," my mother said, but her tone suggested she didn't quite understand, or perhaps didn't quite believe in what I was doing. "It's going well," I offered, though no one had asked. "We just helped Mid-Atlantic Insurance completely overhaul their customer experience platform. Increased their retention by 22%. Derek laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. "Playing with apps while the big dogs handle the real money. Cute." My father cleared his throat, his way of ending conversations he didn't want to continue. Derek was telling us about the new healthcare portfolio he's building. Revolutionary stuff. And just like that, the spotlight swung back to its rightful owner. I sipped my water and let the conversation wash over me, familiar rhythms I'd heard my entire life. Derek's voice rising with excitement as he detailed his latest conquests. My parents leaning forward, hanging on every word. The occasional glance my way as if remembering I existed, followed by a polite question that never required more than a 1-sentence response. What none of them knew was that I hadn't come tonight just to celebrate my father. I'd come because Richard Keller would be here, the CEO of Horizon Ventures, Derek's boss, and the man who had been secretly mentoring me for the past 18 months. "Sorry I'm late." A booming voice cut through the chatter. Richard Keller stood at the entrance of the private dining room, his imposing frame filling the doorway. At 65, he moved with the energy of someone decades younger, his silver hair the only real giveaway of his age. My father stood immediately, hand extended. "Richard, so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it, James." Richard's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Happy birthday, old friend." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Richard made his rounds, greeting everyone at the table with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in rooms where connections matter more than anything else. When he reached me, his eyes crinkled with a private recognition. "Emily Parker," he said warmly. "Good to see you again." Derek's head snapped up from across the table. "You two know each other?" Quote. "Of course." Richard replied casually, taking the empty seat beside me. Emily and I have had some fascinating conversations over the past year or so. I could feel my brother's eyes boring into me, questions forming behind them like storm clouds. But before he could say anything, the waiter arrived with champagne, and my father stood to make a toast. "To family and success," he said, raising his glass. "And to my son Derek, who continues to make us proud every day." My mother beamed. The guests murmured appreciatively, and I took a long sip of champagne to wash down the familiar taste of invisibility. Dinner progressed with the predictable rhythm of these events. Conversation flowed around business, politics, mutual acquaintances. I contributed when I could, but mostly I observed, noting the subtle power dynamics at play. Derek dominated, as always, his voice growing louder with each glass of wine. My father nodded along, occasionally sharing anecdotes from his own business days. My mother smiled and kept the peace. It wasn't until dessert arrived that Derek turned his attention fully to me. "So, Emily," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Mom mentioned you've been working crazy hours lately. Finally realized you need to put in some real effort to catch up?" I maintained my smile. "I've always worked hard, Derek." "Hard, maybe. Smart is another question." He looked around the table, as if inviting everyone to join in his amusement. "Remember when you turned down that job at Goldman after college? Could have set you up for life, but no. Emily had to find her passion." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled around the table. My father shifted in his seat. "Different paths work for different people," I said evenly. "And where has your path led exactly?" Derek pressed. 32 years old, and what do you have to show for it? No real career, no property, no partner. Just bouncing from one trendy business idea to another." "Derek?" my mother murmured, a half-hearted attempt at intervention. "What?" "I'm concerned about her." He didn't look concerned. He looked victorious. Someone has to say it, we all think it. The table fell silent. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Not from embarrassment, but from anger. 2 years ago, I would have shrunk under this attack, made some self-deprecating joke to diffuse the tension, then escaped to the bathroom to compose myself. But I wasn't that person anymore. "I'm doing just fine, Derek," I said, my voice steady. "But thank you for your concern." He snorted. "Fine? Is that what we're calling it?" "Emily, you're nothing but worthless deadweight in this family. Always have been. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop disappointing everyone who cares about you." The words hung in the air like smoke, my mother gasped. My father stared at his dessert. The other guests suddenly became fascinated with their napkins. I should have been devastated. Once upon a time, I would have been. But sitting there, watching my brother's smug expression, all I felt was a strange sense of calm. Because I knew something he didn't. Richard Keller set down his fork deliberately, the small clink against fine china somehow louder than Derek's insult had been. He reached for his water glass and tapped it gently with his spoon. "Actually," he said, rising to his feet, "I'd like to make an announcement." All eyes turned to him. Derek's expression shifted from contempt to professional interest. His CEO is speaking face sliding smoothly into place. "James, I hope you'll forgive me for commandeering a moment of your birthday celebration," Richard said to my father. "But this seems like the perfect opportunity, with so many people I care about in one room." My heart began to race. This wasn't how we'd planned it. We were supposed to announce it next week, at the quarterly company meeting. Richard caught my eye, the slightest nod asking permission. I returned it, barely breathing. "For the past 18 months, Richard continued, I've been working closely with someone truly extraordinary. Someone with vision, intelligence, and the rare ability to see not just where business is today, but where it's heading tomorrow." He paused, looking around the table. "As many of you know, I'll be stepping back from day-to-day operations at Horizon next quarter. What you don't know is who I've chosen to help lead the company into its next chapter." Derek straightened in his chair, a smile already forming on his lips. My mother reached for my father's hand. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Richard's hand came to rest lightly on my shoulder. "Meet Emily Parker, my new managing partner." The silence that followed was absolute, then exploded into chaos. "What?" Derek's voice cut through the sudden eruption of exclamations and questions. His face had drained of all color. "Emily has been quietly revolutionizing how we approach digital strategy at Horizon," Richard explained calmly. "The Morris healthcare transformation? That was her model. The Westfield retail resurrection? Her architecture. While maintaining her own consulting business, she's been rebuilding our entire approach to legacy industries from the ground up." My father's mouth opened and closed without sound. My mother clutched her necklace so tightly I feared it might break. "But," Derek began, then stopped, seemingly unable to form a coherent thought. "We're announcing it officially next week," Richard continued. "Emily will be leading our new digital transformation division as managing partner, with a full equity stake. The board approved it unanimously last month." I watched my brother's face as the reality sank in. In the span of 30 seconds, his perfect world had shifted on its axis. The sister he'd dismissed as worthless was now his equal. Technically, his superior in the company hierarchy. "You can't be serious," Derek finally managed. "She's not. She doesn't have the experience." "She has exactly the experience we need." Richard cut in, his tone still pleasant but brooking no argument. "Which is why I approached her, not the other way around." My father found his voice at last. "You've been working at Horizon all this time?" I shook my head. "Not as an employee, as a consultant at first, then as a strategic partner. I kept my own business running while developing new models for Richard's digital initiatives." "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. The question hung there, so heavy with irony, I almost laughed. Why hadn't I told them? Perhaps because in 20 years, they'd never really asked what I was doing. Perhaps because Derek had trained them so thoroughly to dismiss my career as trivial that I'd stopped expecting them to care. "I wanted to wait until everything was finalized," I said instead. "Until there was something concrete to share." Richard raised his glass. "To Emily Parker and the future of Horizon Ventures." The toast was echoed around the table, glasses raised with varying degrees of enthusiasm and shock. Everyone except Derek, who sat frozen, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. As conversation erupted around us, questions about my role, congratulations, surprised exclamations, I held my brother's gaze steadily. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply let him sit with the knowledge that everything he thought he knew about me, about his place in the world, about the natural order of things, had been wrong. Because success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. And in that moment, watching my brother confront the reality of who I truly was, I realized I'd already won, long before Richard ever made his announcement. The real victory wasn't becoming his partner. It was becoming the person who no longer needed her family's validation to know her worth. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Derek cornered me near the coat check, his composure somewhat recovered but his eyes still blazing. "How long have you been planning this?" he demanded, voice low. "Planning what? Working hard? Being recognized for it? I've been doing that my whole life, Derek. You just never bothered to notice. You went behind my back. To my company, my CEO." I shook my head. "It was never about you. That's what you don't understand. Not everything is." "We'll see how long this lasts," he said, straightening his tie. "Richard likes his shiny new toys, but Horizon is built on relationships and experience. Real experience." "You're right," I agreed. "Which is why you might want to look at what I've actually been doing these past 5 years while you were dismissing me as worthless. My client portfolio. My success rate. My innovations that are now industry standards." I stepped closer, dropping my voice. "I never needed to go behind your back, Derek. You were so busy looking down at me you never bothered to look around and see I was already ahead." I walked away then, leaving him standing there as I joined Richard and my parents, who were deep in conversation near the exit. My father looked dazed, my mother teary-eyed. "Emily," my father said as I approached, "Richard's been telling us about your work. It sounds remarkable." Was that pride in his voice? I couldn't be sure. I wasn't used to hearing it directed at me. "Thanks, Dad," I said simply. "I've been fortunate to find work I love." My mother reached for my hand. Why didn't you tell us? All those times we asked about your little business. You never asked, I said gently. Not really. The truth of it settled over us, uncomfortable but unavoidable. They hadn't asked because they hadn't expected there to be anything worth knowing. And I had stopped offering, because I'd grown tired of having my achievements minimized. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. I should head out. Early flight tomorrow. He turned to my parents. Your daughter is going to transform this industry. You should be very proud. After he left, my parents and I stood in awkward silence, years of missed connections and misunderstandings stretching between us like a vast uncharted territory. We should talk, my father finally said. All of us. Soon. I nodded. I'd like that. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of the announcement or the shocked expressions, or even the reversal of fortune with Derek, but because for the first time, I was standing fully in my truth. I had spent so many years trying to make myself small enough to fit into the box my family had built for me. The quiet daughter, the less successful sibling, the perpetual disappointment. But the box had never been real. It had been built of expectations and assumptions, reinforced by my own willingness to accept their limitations as truth. Walking to my car, I thought about all the moments that had led me here. The painful family dinners, the dismissive comments, the constant comparisons to Derek, but also the late nights building my business. The risks I'd taken, the failures I'd learned from, and the successes I'd earned through relentless work and unwavering belief in my vision. I thought about Richard finding me through a mutual connection, reaching out after reading an article I'd published on digital transformation in traditional industries. His surprise when we first met, realizing I was that Emily Parker, Derek's sister, the underachiever, and his greater surprise when he saw my work, my client list, my results. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. You handled that beautifully. Sorry for the surprise timing. I smiled as I typed back. Perfect timing, actually. Because it was. Not for revenge or vindication, but because it forced a reckoning that was long overdue. With Derek, with my parents, but most importantly, with myself. The girl who had let herself be diminished by her brother's shadow was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built something meaningful on her own terms, who had earned her seat at the table through merit and vision, rather than family connection or external validation. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I realized that the most powerful transformation of all had nothing to do with business models or digital strategies. It was the transformation of my own self-perception, from someone who measured her worth through others' eyes to someone who recognized her own value without apology or explanation. Derek's words, worthless dead weight, no longer had the power to wound me, because I knew who I was, and soon, the world would know too. The silence in my apartment felt different that night. Usually, so when I returned from family gatherings, the silence was heavy with things unsaid, opportunities missed, judgments internalized. But as I kicked off my heels and poured myself a small glass of celebration whiskey, this silence felt expansive, full of possibility rather than regret. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I'd left the restaurant. Messages from colleagues who'd heard through the grapevine. A lengthy, emotional text from my mother. 3 missed calls from my father. Nothing from Derek. I ignored them all, choosing instead to savor this moment alone. Tomorrow would bring explanations, reconciliations, confrontations. Tonight was mine. The morning arrived with a clarity I wasn't accustomed to. I'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woken with purpose. As I prepared for the day, choosing a crisp navy suit that had always made me feel powerful, I thought about what lay ahead. Not just the formal announcement at Horizon, but the inevitable family fallout. My phone lit up with a text from Richard. War Room, 8 a.m., bringing in communications to start prep for the announcement. I smiled, always 3 steps ahead. That's why I'd grown to respect him so much, not just for his business acumen, but for his strategic foresight. When he'd first approached me after reading my paper on digital disruption in established industries, I'd been skeptical. Why would the CEO of one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country be interested in my ideas? Because you see what others don't, he'd said during that first meeting, leaning forward across a coffee shop table, eyes intense. You understand that transformation isn't just about technology. It's about human behavior, institutional memory, and the courage to reimagine what's possible. Over the next 18 months, that coffee shop conversation had evolved into the most significant professional relationship of my life. Richard became mentor, champion, and eventually partner. He pushed me harder than anyone ever had, challenged my thinking, opened doors I hadn't known existed. And through it all, I'd kept it secret. Not out of shame, but out of a determination to prove myself on my own terms before facing my family's inevitable skepticism. As I drove to Horizon's gleaming downtown headquarters, I thought about Derek's face when Richard had made the announcement. The shock. The disbelief. The slow dawning of a reality he wasn't prepared to accept. Part of me had enjoyed that moment. A small, human part one wasn't entirely proud of. But the larger part of me just felt sad for what our relationship had become. We hadn't always been adversaries. Once, we'd been allies. The memory surfaced as I pulled into the parking garage. Derek at 12, me at 8, building elaborate forts in the backyard. He'd been my hero then, teaching me to climb trees, to throw a perfect spiral, to stand up to the neighborhood bullies. When had that changed? When had his protectiveness transformed into something more insidious? A need to diminish me to elevate himself. I pushed the thought away as I rode the elevator to the executive floor. Now wasn't the time for childhood reminiscence. I had work to do. The war room was already buzzing when I arrived. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by the communications team, HR leadership, and several board members who had dialed in virtually. He looked up as I entered, genuine warmth in his smile. "There she is," he said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Let's get started." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of planning, press releases drafted and redrafted, social media strategy outlined, talking points refined, internal communication sequences established. Throughout it all, I felt a strange sense of surrealism. Was this really happening? Was I really about to become a managing partner at one of the most influential venture capital firms in the country? "Emily," Richard said during a brief break, "you've gone quiet. Second thoughts?" I shook my head. "Just taking it all in, it's becoming real." "It's been real," he corrected. "Now it's just becoming public." As the meeting wrapped up, my phone buzzed. Derek. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "We need to talk," he said without preamble when I answered. "I'm at work." "So am I." His voice was tight. 30 minutes. The coffee shop in the lobby of your building." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to put this off, to focus on the announcement preparations, but another part knew this conversation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms, in a public place, before emotions escalated further. 20 minutes. I countered. "I have a packed day." He hung up without responding. When I reached the lobby coffee shop, Derek was already there, sitting at a corner table, 2 cups in front of him. He'd lost the shell-shocked expression from last night, replacing it with something more controlled, more calculated. Classic Derek. Always regrouping, always strategizing. "You ordered for me?" I asked, sliding into the chair across from him. "Oat milk latte. Double shot," he said. "You still drink those, right?" I nodded, surprised he remembered. "Thanks." Neither of us spoke for a moment. The coffee shop hummed with morning energy. People rushing to meetings, laptops opening, phones buzzing. Normal life continuing all around us while our worlds recalibrated. "How long?" he finally asked. "Richard approached me about 18 months ago. After he read my paper on—" "Not that," Derek cut in. "How long have you been planning to undermine me?" I set my cup down carefully. Is that what you think this is about? What else would it be? You specifically targeted my company, my CEO, my career path. Your company, I repeated. Horizon doesn't belong to you, Derek. You know what I mean. I've been there 5 years, working my way up, building relationships, proving myself. Then you swoop in and get handed a partnership? The anger in his voice was real, but beneath it I heard something else. Fear. Insecurity. The sound of a man whose certainties were crumbling. I didn't swoop in, I said evenly. Richard reached out to me because of my work. Work you've been dismissing for years, by the way. He asked me to consult on digital strategy. That evolved into a bigger role because I delivered results. So what? You just happened to end up in direct competition with your own brother? You expect me to believe that's a coincidence? I leaned forward. Derek, I know this is hard to hear, but not everything is about you. I accepted this opportunity because it aligned with my vision, my goals, my expertise. Your presence at Horizon was a complication, not a motivation. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. Right. And I'm supposed to believe you kept it secret all this time out of, what, professional discretion? Would you have believed in me if I'd told you? I asked quietly. Or would you have done exactly what you're doing now? Assumed I couldn't possibly have earned this on merit. The question landed like a physical blow. Derek leaned back, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. You really think that's how I see you? Isn't it? Last night you called me worthless dead weight. Was that an aberration? Or just an unusually honest moment? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was drunk, caught off guard. You were honest, I corrected. You said what you've always thought, what you've always wanted our parents to think. Derek ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported me back to childhood, watching him get ready for prom, for college interviews, for his first real job. Always so confident, so certain of his place in the world. It's not that simple, he finally said. Explain it to me then, I challenged. Help me understand why my own brother has spent years trying to convince everyone I'm a failure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek stared into his coffee. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. Do you remember when we were kids? How Dad used to take us to his office on weekends? I nodded. Those Saturday mornings had been special, riding up in the big elevator, spinning in Dad's chair, drawing on legal pads while he finished up work. He always gave us the same speech, Derek continued. This could all be yours someday, the Parker legacy. But he wasn't looking at both of us when he said it. He was looking at you. I frowned. What are you talking about? Emily, you were always the smart one, the creative one, the natural. Dad saw it before anyone else. When you were 8, you redesigned his filing system to be more efficient. At 12, you were already spotting market trends in his industry reports. By 16, you were running circles around his junior analysts. I shook my head, disbelieving. Derek, Dad has spent my entire life comparing me to you. Why can't you be more focused like Derek? More practical like Derek? More ambitious like Derek? Because he was trying to mold you. Derek's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowered it again with visible effort. He saw your potential and got scared. You weren't following the script, weren't interested in the traditional path. So he pushed you toward convention, toward being more like me, because he understood that. It was safe. I sat back, trying to process this reframing of my entire childhood. Could it be true? Had I misinterpreted years of criticism as disappointment, rather than fear-driven redirection? Even if that's true, I said slowly, it doesn't explain why you've been so determined to diminish me. Derek's laugh was hollow, doesn't it? I was supposed to be the business prodigy, the one who'd take over Dad's legacy. Then along comes my little sister, with twice my natural talent and none of my desperation to please. Do you know how terrifying that was? So you tore me down to build yourself up? He had the decency to look ashamed. I told myself I was protecting you. That the business world would chew you up and spit you out if you didn't toughen up. That your idealism would be your downfall. He met my eyes directly. But really, I was protecting myself from the inevitability of you outshining me. The honesty hung between us, unexpected and raw. For years, I'd imagined this confrontation, Derek finally admitting his deliberate campaign to undermine me. But I'd always pictured it as a victory. Instead, it felt hollow, sad, a confession of weakness rather than malice. We could have been allies, I said quietly. We could have supported each other. I know. The simple acknowledgement contained volumes. My phone buzzed, a reminder of my next meeting. I glanced at it, then back at Derek. I have to go. He nodded. The announcement prep, I assume? Yes. Will I still have a job after this goes public? There was a vulnerability in the question that struck me deeply. That's not my decision, I said honestly. But Richard values your work in traditional sectors. That's not changing. My division will be separate, focused on digital transformation. Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked. So, what happens now? With us? I considered the question carefully. What did happen now? Could 2 decades of competition and resentment be undone by one honest conversation? Unlikely, but perhaps it was a start. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we've lived too long in the shadows of who we thought we were supposed to be. Maybe it's time we got to know who we actually are. Derek nodded slowly. I'd like that. As I walked back toward the elevator, I felt lighter, as if a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there had finally lifted. Not completely. There were years of patterns to unlearn, trust to rebuild, new dynamics to establish. But it was a beginning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and strategy sessions. By late afternoon, I was mentally exhausted but exhilarated. Tomorrow, the announcement would go public. Tomorrow, everything would change. My phone rang as I was gathering my things to leave. My father. I'd been avoiding his calls all day, not ready for another emotionally charged conversation. But I couldn't put it off forever. Dad, I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. Emily. He sounded different, subdued, uncertain. Your mother and I would like to see you. Can you come to the house? I hesitated. The thought of facing both of them, of navigating the complex emotions of the previous night was daunting, but necessary. I'll be there in an hour, I said. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs was familiar, a route I'd traveled countless times, past the high school where I'd been valedictorian, past the park where I'd had my first kiss, past the library where I'd spent hours escaping into books when family dynamics became too suffocating. The landmarks of a life that had shaped me, for better and worse. My mother opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug that caught me off guard. Emily? She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Inside, my father stood awkwardly in the living room, hands in pockets, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. The house was exactly as I remembered, tasteful, traditional, every object carefully chosen and perfectly placed. Like my parents themselves, it valued order and appearance above all. Sit, please, my mother urged, gesturing to the sofa. I complied, perching on the edge, ready for whatever might come. My father cleared his throat. Emily, we owe you an apology. Of all the ways I'd imagined this conversation starting, that hadn't been one of them. James Parker didn't apologize. He justified, explained, sometimes compensated, but never apologized. We spoke with Derek this afternoon, my mother added, sitting beside me. He helped us understand some things, about how we've treated you, about the patterns we created. We got it wrong, my father said bluntly. We saw your independence as rebellion, your creativity as impracticality, your determination to forge your own path as a rejection of our values. It wasn't, I said softly. I just needed to find my own way. We know that now. My mother took my hand. "And we're so proud of what you've built. Not just this partnership, but everything. Your business, your reputation, your vision." Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. For years, I'd told myself I didn't need their approval, their understanding. I'd built my life and career specifically to prove I could succeed without it. Yet hearing those words, "we're so proud," unlocked something in me I hadn't realized was still locked away. "Why now?" I asked. "Because Richard Keller validated me? Because I finally achieved something you recognize as success?" My father sat down across from us, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "Partly," he admitted. "We're not perfect, Emily. We understand the world through certain frameworks, certain measures of achievement. It's taken us too long to recognize that your measures are different, but no less valid." "But it's more than that," my mother added. "Seeing you last night, the confidence, the clarity, the purpose, we realized how wrong we've been, how much we've missed by trying to fit you into a mold you were never meant for." "Derek said something that hit home," my father continued. "He said we've been so busy trying to protect you from failure that we never gave you the space to define success for yourself." I looked between them, these people who had shaped me in ways both intentional and unintentional, the mother who had taught me resilience through her quiet determination, the father whose approval I'd sought and never quite found. Until now, perhaps, I needed you to believe in me. I said simply. "Not just in who you wanted me to be, but in who I actually was." "We do now," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "Better late than never." It wasn't that simple, of course. Years of conditional approval and subtle undermining couldn't be undone in a single conversation. Trust would need to be rebuilt, new patterns established, old wounds acknowledged and healed. But as we talked into the evening, really talked, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, I felt something shift between us, a door opening that had been closed for too long. My father shared his fears, that the business world would crush my spirit, that my unconventional approach would leave me vulnerable, that he'd failed to prepare me for the realities he'd faced in his own career. My mother revealed her regrets, the times she'd stayed silent when she should have defended me, the ways she'd reinforced harmful comparisons between Derek and me, her own struggle to break free of traditional expectations. And I shared my truth, how their doubts had both wounded and fueled me, how I'd built my career partly in defiance of their narrow definition of success, how desperately I'd wanted their recognition even as I pretended not to need it. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of defensiveness, of old patterns reasserting themselves. But it was honest, and in that honesty lay the possibility of something new. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurring through unexpected tears, I thought about transformation, not just of businesses or industries, but of relationships, of self-perception, of family dynamics calcified by years of misunderstanding. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Ready for tomorrow?" I smiled, typing back, "More than ready." Because I was. Ready not just for the public announcement of my partnership, for the new professional chapter that awaited, but for the deeper transformation taking place, the emergence of a version of myself no longer defined by others' expectations or limited by their perceptions. The girl who had spent years trying to prove her worth was becoming a woman who simply knew it. And that, I realized, was the most revolutionary transformation of all. The morning of the announcement dawned bright and clear, a perfect September day full of promise. I stood in my closet longer than usual, deliberating over what to wear. This wasn't vanity, it was strategy. Today, I would step into the spotlight not just as Richard Keller's protégé or Derek Parker's sister, but as Emily Parker, managing partner of Horizon Ventures' new digital transformation division. I finally settled on a structured midnight blue dress, professional but distinctive, conventional enough to signal I belonged in the boardroom but modern enough to reflect my vision for the future. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, a reminder of the quiet strength of the women who had come before me, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Car will pick you up in 30. Media already gathering." I took a deep breath, surveying my reflection one last time. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had walked into my father's birthday dinner 2 nights ago. Physically, I was unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted in my eyes. A certainty, a clarity that hadn't been there before. Not just about my career, but about who I was and what I was capable of. The town car arrived precisely on time, its black exterior gleaming in the morning sun. As we pulled away from my building, I watched the city wake up around us. Coffee shops filling with early risers, joggers navigating crosswalks, delivery trucks unloading fresh inventory. Normal life continuing while mine transformed. "Nervous?" the driver asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. I considered the question. "Excited?" I said, realizing it was true. The anxiety that had plagued me for so long, the fear of not measuring up, of disappointing, of being exposed as somehow less than, had dissipated, replaced by a calm anticipation of what lay ahead. Horizon's headquarters loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the morning light. As we pulled up to the entrance, I could see the media setup Richard had mentioned. Cameras positioned, reporters chatting, the atmosphere charged with the energy that surrounds significant announcements. Richard was waiting in the lobby, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the light. He smiled when he saw me, the warm, genuine smile that had made me trust him from our first meeting. "Ready to make history?" he asked, extending his hand. I took it firmly. "Absolutely." We rode the elevator to the top floor in companionable silence. The doors opened to reveal the executive suite transformed, flowers everywhere, champagne being arranged on silver trays, staff members moving purposefully, putting final touches on the setting for the announcement. "Emily!" Diane from communications approached, tablet in hand. "Final run-through in 5 minutes. Then we'll start bringing up the press at 9:30. I nodded, following her to the conference room that had been staged for the announcement. Richard and I would sit side by side at a sleek table, Horizon's logo projected behind us, the panoramic city view serving as a backdrop to our vision for the future. As we rehearsed one last time, Richard outlining the company's evolution, me detailing the new division's strategy, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had I practiced presentations in empty rooms, imagining what it would be like to have people actually listen? To have my ideas valued not just for their novelty but for their substance? "You've got this," Richard said as we finished, squeezing my shoulder briefly, "just like we practiced." And then everything accelerated. The room filled with journalists, photographers, industry analysts, faces I recognized from business publications, voices I'd heard on financial podcasts, all here to listen to me. To us. Richard stepped to the podium first, his presence commanding immediate attention. He spoke eloquently about Horizon's history, its evolution, its commitment to staying ahead of market shifts. "Which is why," he said, turning slightly toward me, "I'm thrilled to announce the formation of Horizon's Digital Transformation Division, led by our new managing partner, Emily Parker." The room swiveled toward me as I rose and approached the podium. Flashbulbs popped. Pens hovered over notepads. A sea of expectant faces waited for me to speak. I'd rehearsed this moment countless times, had memorized my talking points, practiced my delivery, anticipated the questions. But standing there, feeling the weight of the moment, I set the prepared remarks aside and spoke from the heart. "Transformation," I began, "is not about technology. It's about possibility. About having the courage to envision a future different from the past and the wisdom to bring others along on that journey." I paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with individual faces in the crowd. At Horizon, we've always understood that the most powerful innovations aren't just disruptive. They're inclusive. They don't just change markets, they expand them. They don't just solve problems, they reveal opportunities we didn't know existed. The words flowed naturally, without effort or artifice. I spoke about my vision for the division, about the companies we'd already helped transform, about the methodologies we'd developed that were becoming industry standards. I shared case studies, data points, success metrics. But underneath it all was a simple truth. I believed in what I was saying. Completely and without reservation. When I finished, the questions came rapid fire. Sharp, probing, exactly what I'd expect from financial journalists looking for the story behind the story. "Ms. Parker, how does your approach differ from traditional digital consultancies?" "Mr. Keller, what prompted this strategic shift for Horizon?" "Ms. Parker, Will your division focus on specific industries or take a broader approach? We fielded them all with practiced ease, our responses complementing each other, our vision clearly aligned. It felt less like a press conference and more like a conversation, dynamic, engaged, purposeful. Then, from the back of the room, a voice I recognized immediately. Ms. Parker, how do you respond to industry speculation that your appointment is more about optics than expertise? That Horizon is trying to address its diversity gap by promoting a relatively unknown quantity to partner? Derek. Standing at the rear of the room, press badge somehow procured, expression unreadable. The room went quiet. Richard tensed beside me, leaning slightly toward the microphone, but I placed a hand on his arm. This question was mine to answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's an interesting framing, I said, looking directly at my brother. It assumes several things. That my expertise isn't well established in my field, that diversity and excellence are somehow mutually exclusive, and that Horizon Ventures, one of the most successful venture capital firms in the country, would compromise its standards for optics. I smiled slightly, maintaining eye contact with Derek. I would challenge all of those assumptions. My track record speaks for itself. The Morris healthcare transformation, the Westfield retail reinvention, the digital banking platform that's now industry standard. These weren't PR exercises. They were fundamental business transformations that delivered measurable results. I leaned forward slightly. As for diversity, yes, I'm a woman in a predominantly male industry, but I don't see that as a liability or a token qualification. I see it as one of many perspectives that inform my approach to problem solving. The best solutions come from diverse thinking, diverse experiences, diverse voices at the table. The room had gone completely still, every eye on this unexpected confrontation. Finally, I concluded, I'd invite anyone questioning my qualifications to review our case studies, methodology papers, and client testimonials. Judge me by my work. That's all I ask. For a moment, Derek held my gaze, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and slipped out of the room. The press conference continued, but the energy had shifted. There was a new intensity to the questions, a deeper curiosity about who I was and what I brought to the table. By the time we concluded, I knew we'd accomplished what we'd set out to do, established Horizon's bold new direction and my role in shaping it. As the journalists filed out, Richard turned to me, eyebrows raised. Was that? My brother, I confirmed. Yes, his mouth tightened. I didn't authorize his press credentials. Someone will be having a very uncomfortable conversation with HR. Let it go, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. He needed to ask the question, and I needed to answer it. Richard studied me for a moment, then nodded. Well, you certainly did that. Brilliantly. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory calls, strategy meetings, and administrative tasks. By late afternoon, I was exhausted but exhilarated, my mind racing with possibilities for the Division 1 would now lead. As I gathered my things to leave, a soft knock came at my new office door. I looked up to find Derek standing there, hands in pockets, expression uncertain. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat, taking in the space, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek modern furniture, the framed awards and press clippings that the communications team had curated to establish my credibility. Nice office, he said finally. Thanks. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history and the morning's confrontation hanging between us. That was a good answer, he said eventually, to my question. I raised an eyebrow. Was it a real question? Or were you testing me? Both, maybe. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. I needed to see if you could handle it. The scrutiny, the doubt, the constant need to prove yourself. It's not easy, Em, especially not for a woman, I supplied. Anyone who doesn't fit the expected mold, he corrected. I've watched talented people get chewed up and spit out by this industry because they couldn't handle the pressure. I needed to know you could. I studied my brother's face, trying to reconcile this explanation with the years of dismissal and undermining. And now? I asked. Now I know, he said simply. You're ready, more than ready. I leaned back in my chair, considering his words. Was this another manipulation? Another attempt to position himself favorably in a situation he couldn't control? Or was it genuine concern, however misguided in its expression? I don't need your approval, Derek, I said finally, or your protection. Quote, I know, he said quickly. That's not. He stopped, regrouped. I'm trying to say I was wrong. About you. About what you're capable of. The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and strangely powerful. Derek Parker didn't admit being wrong. Ever. It was one of his defining characteristics, this absolute certainty in his own judgment. What changed? I asked. He looked out the window, at the city spread below us, buildings catching the late afternoon light. Watching you up there today, he said slowly, the clarity, the vision, the absolute certainty in what you were saying. I remember when I first felt that alignment between what you believe and what you're building. It's rare, Emily. Rarer than you might think. He turned back to me. Most people in this industry are playing a role, saying what they think others want to hear, chasing whatever trend seems profitable. But you actually believe in transformation, not just as a buzzword, but as a possibility. I was silent, absorbing this assessment. Anyway, he continued, standing, I just wanted to say congratulations, and I'm sorry. For a lot of things. As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, Derek, wait. He paused at the door. Why did you come today? To the press conference? He considered the question. I thought I was coming to expose you, he admitted, to ask the question everyone would be thinking but too polite to say, to make you prove yourself publicly. And instead, a small, rueful smile touched his lips. Instead, I realized you never needed to prove anything to anyone. Least of all to me. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, watching the sky shift from afternoon gold to evening blue. My phone buzzed periodically. Messages of congratulation, meeting requests, media inquiries, the world responding to my new position, my new visibility. But my mind kept returning to Derek's words, to the unexpected vulnerability in his admission. For years, I'd seen him as my opposition, the golden child against whom I was always measured and found wanting. I'd never considered that his confidence might be as carefully constructed as my resilience, that his certainty might mask the same human fears and doubts that plagued us all. It didn't excuse the years of undermining, the deliberate campaign to diminish me, but it contextualized it in a way that made forgiveness seem possible, eventually. My phone rang, cutting through my reflection. Mom. Emily? She said when I answered, her voice warm with pride. We watched the press conference online. You were magnificent. Thanks, Mom, I said, surprised by how much her approval still meant, despite everything. Your father wants to know if you'll come to dinner on Sunday. He's grilling your favorite cedar plank salmon. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to maintain distance, to protect the hard-won independence I'd cultivated. But another part recognized that transformation wasn't just for businesses or careers. It was also for relationships, for families, for the patterns we create and can choose to recreate. I'd like that, I said. What can I bring? Just yourself, she replied. That's all we want. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering twilight of my new office, contemplating the view. The city spread out before me, a tapestry of light and shadow, of lives intersecting and diverging, of possibilities waiting to be realized. I thought about transformation, how we so often think of it as something external, something we do to systems or organizations or technologies. But the most profound transformations are internal. They happen in the quiet moments of recognition, in the courageous acts of honesty, in the willingness to see ourselves and others with new eyes. For years, I'd defined myself in opposition to Derek's golden child status, to my parents' narrow expectations, to an industry that often valued conformity over innovation. I'd built my identity around proving others wrong about who I was and what I could achieve. But sitting there, on the precipice of a new chapter, I realized I no longer needed that oppositional energy. I could define myself not against others' expectations, but toward my own vision, not in terms of what I wasn't, but in terms of what I was creating. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Dinner with the team, 7 p.m., time to celebrate. I gathered my things, took one last look at the city view, and stepped out of my office into the future I was building. Not alone, but in community with others who shared my vision. Not in defiance of the past, but in service to possibilities yet to be realized. The restaurant was buzzing when I arrived. A high-end steakhouse downtown that Richard had reserved for the occasion. The entire digital transformation team was there. Analysts, strategists, designers, engineers, the diverse group of brilliant minds I'd helped assemble over the past year and would now lead publicly. They stood when I entered, breaking into spontaneous applause. Richard raised his glass in a toast. "To Emily Parker," he called out, his voice carrying over the chatter, "who saw what was possible before the rest of us and had the courage to make it real." Glasses clinked. Cheers erupted. And as I looked around at these faces, some familiar from months of collaboration, others newer additions to the team, I felt a profound sense of belonging. Not because they approved of me or validated me, but because we were united by a shared vision, a collective purpose that transcended individual ego or acclaim. The evening unfolded with the easy camaraderie of people who respect each other's minds and believe in each other's capabilities. We talked strategy and market trends, shared stories and aspirations, laughed and debated and built connections that would serve us in the challenging work ahead. Midway through dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "You killed it today. I meant what I said. Call if you want to talk more." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of history and the possibility of a different future. Then I typed back, "Thanks, one day at a time." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That would take longer, would require more evidence of genuine change. But it was an opening, a willingness to consider that people, like businesses, like systems, could transform if given the right conditions, the right motivations, the right support. As the evening wound down and we said our goodbyes, Richard pulled me aside. "So," he said, studying my face, "how does it feel to step into the spotlight on your own terms?" I considered the question carefully. "Liberating," I said finally, "and terrifying, and exactly right." He nodded, understanding. The best things usually are all three. Walking home through the city streets, I felt a profound sense of alignment between who I was and what I was building, between my values and my work, between my past struggles and my future vision. The journey hadn't been linear or easy. There had been false starts, detours, moments of doubt so profound I'd questioned everything. But standing on the other side of those challenges, I could see how each apparent setback had actually been preparation, each moment of being underestimated had actually been an opportunity to exceed expectations. Each instance of being dismissed had actually strengthened my resolve to be heard. My apartment felt different when I returned, not the sanctuary from family judgment it had once been, but simply home. A place that reflected who I was, filled with books that had shaped my thinking, art that inspired me, mementos from travels that had expanded my perspective. I kicked off my heels, poured a small glass of celebratory whiskey, and stepped out onto my balcony. The city twinkled below, a constellation of lights representing countless lives, countless stories, countless possibilities unfolding simultaneously. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the real work of building the division I'd envisioned, of leading a team through uncharted territory, of transforming not just how businesses operated, but how they understood their own potential. There would be resistance and setbacks, skeptics and competitors, moments of doubt and difficult decisions. But tonight, standing under the vast night sky, I felt ready for all of it. Not because I had all the answers or because success was guaranteed, but because I had finally learned the most important lesson of transformation. It begins not with changing others, but with changing how we see ourselves. For years, I had allowed myself to be defined by others' perceptions, as the less successful sibling, the unconventional daughter, the outsider in an industry that valued conformity. I had internalized those limitations, fought against them, defined myself in opposition to them. But true freedom came not from proving others wrong, but from recognizing that their perceptions had never been the truth. The truth was in the work I'd done, the vision I'd built, the impact I'd created. The truth was in the team that believed in that vision, the clients whose businesses had been transformed by it, the industry that was beginning to recognize its value. The truth was that I had always been exactly who I needed to be, not in spite of my differences, but because of them. My unconventional path, my creative approach, my willingness to question established norms. These weren't liabilities to be overcome, but assets to be leveraged. As I raised my glass to the city spread out before me, I made a silent toast not to my new title or public recognition, but to the journey that had brought me here, to the moments of doubt and the acts of courage, to the failures that taught me resilience and the small victories that kept me going, and most of all, to the person I had become along the way, someone who no longer needed external validation to know her own worth. Someone who understood that the most powerful transformation isn't about proving others wrong, but about proving yourself right. That realization, more than any title or announcement, was the true victory, and it had been mine all along. 6 months after the announcement that shocked my family and transformed my career, I found myself standing on a different stage. Smaller, humbler, but in many ways more meaningful. The auditorium of Westlake High School, my alma mater, was filled with young women attending the school's first Women in Business Leadership Conference. Their faces looked up at me with that unique combination of teenage skepticism and unguarded hope that makes youth simultaneously vulnerable and powerful. When I sat where you're sitting 15 years ago, I began, I thought success was a straight line. You set a goal, you work toward it, you achieve it. Simple. A knowing ripple of laughter moved through the audience. I couldn't have been more wrong. The spotlight felt warm on my face as I moved away from the podium, choosing to walk the edge of the stage instead, to connect more directly with these young women whose futures stretched before them, unwritten. Success isn't a destination, I continued. It's not a title, or a salary, or a corner office, though those things are nice. Another laugh. Success is alignment between who you are, what you value, and what you create in the world. I scanned the faces watching me, some rapt, some distracted, some clearly wondering when this would be over so they could check their phones, just like I would have at their age. The problem is, I said, lowering my voice slightly, drawing them in, most of us spend years chasing someone else's definition of success. We follow paths laid out by parents, teachers, society. Paths that might be perfectly valid, but weren't designed for us. I paused, remembering my own journey. The detours, the false starts, the moments of doubt that had felt like failure, but were actually recalibration. My brother called me worthless at a dinner 6 months ago, I said, the admission sending a small shock through the room. In front of my parents, colleagues, his boss. He said it with absolute certainty, as if stating an obvious fact. I let that sink in for a moment, watching their expressions shift from shock to sympathy, to indignation on my behalf. 5 minutes later, that same boss stood up and announced I was his new managing partner. A wave of surprised laughter and scattered applause rippled through the audience. Now, I'd love to tell you that's where the story ends. With perfect vindication, with proving everyone wrong in a single dramatic moment. But real life is more complicated than that. More interesting, too. I walked back to the podium, took a sip of water, and continued. That moment wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of the real work. Not just of building a division that would transform how businesses adapt to digital change, but of transforming relationships that had been defined by misunderstanding for decades. Of learning to see my family with new eyes, and allowing them to see me differently too. The 6 months since the announcement had been intense, exhilarating, and profoundly transformative. Not just professionally, but personally. The digital transformation division had exceeded even our ambitious projections, securing major clients across industries, pioneering methodologies that were becoming industry standards, attracting top talent eager to be part of something revolutionary. But the more meaningful transformation had been happening quietly, in Sunday dinners and weekday phone calls, in coffee meetings with Derek and long walks with my mother, in email exchanges with my father that gradually shifted from formal to warm. The hardest lesson I've learned, I told the students, is that transformation isn't about rejection. It's not about burning down what came before to build something entirely new. It's about integration, taking what works, leaving what doesn't, and creating something that honors the past while embracing the future. I could see some of them nodding, others taking notes, a few staring out windows. Just like any classroom, any audience, any cross-section of humanity. Some would hear what I was saying now. Others might remember it years later when they needed it most. When my brother called me worthless, I continued, he was expressing a belief system he'd built his entire identity around. That value is determined by traditional markers of success. That worth is measured by titles and salaries and conformity to expectations. I had spent years fighting against that belief system, trying to prove it wrong. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But here's what I've come to understand. The opposite of a limiting belief isn't rejection of that belief. It's expansion beyond it. It's not about proving others wrong. It's about creating a bigger truth that encompasses both their perspective and yours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In the months since that dinner, my brother and I have begun rebuilding our relationship, not as competitors in a zero-sum game, but as allies with different strengths, different perspectives, different contributions to make. My parents have started to see me not as the daughter who rejected their path, but as the daughter who blazed her own trail and invited them to walk it with her. I looked out at the sea of young faces, imagining the journeys ahead of them, the victories and setbacks, the moments of clarity and confusion, the relationships that would shape them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Your worth isn't determined by others, recognition of it, I said, my voice growing more passionate. But that doesn't mean relationships don't matter. The people who love us, even imperfectly, even with limitations, are part of our story. And transformation is most powerful when it lifts others along with us. I shared how Derek and I had begun collaborating on projects that bridged our different approaches, his deep expertise in traditional venture capital, my innovative frameworks for digital transformation, how our complementary perspectives were creating outcomes neither of us could have achieved alone. I told them about the family dinner 2 months after the announcement, when my father had raised his glass and said, simply, to Emily, who saw possibilities we couldn't yet see, and how those words had healed something in me I hadn't realized was still wounded. The truth is, I admitted, I spent years defining myself in opposition to my family, especially to my brother. I thought I had to reject their values completely to find my own. But that kind of oppositional identity is just another trap. True freedom comes when you can integrate all parts of your experience, taking what serves you, leaving what doesn't, and creating something authentic and whole. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I spoke, I noticed a figure slip into the back of the auditorium. Derek, arriving quietly, sliding into an empty seat at the rear. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave a small nod of encouragement. 6 months ago, I would have interpreted his presence as surveillance, as criticism. Today, I recognized it as support. Transformation isn't a single moment, I continued, turning back to the audience. It's a series of choices made daily to align your actions with your values. To build something meaningful, rather than merely impressive. To measure success not by external validation, but by internal congruence. I shared specific examples from our work at Horizon, how we'd helped a century-old manufacturing company embrace digital tools without abandoning their craft heritage. How we'd guided a struggling media company through a transition that honored their journalistic traditions while pioneering new formats. How we'd worked with a healthcare provider to integrate cutting-edge technology with their commitment to compassionate care. In each case, I explained, the key wasn't rejection of the past or blind embrace of the future. It was thoughtful integration, taking the best of both worlds to create something stronger, more resilient, more authentic. As I moved toward the conclusion of my talk, I looked directly at the young women in the front row, making eye contact with each one in turn. You will face moments when others try to define your worth based on their limited understanding of who you are. When they call you worthless because you don't fit their expectations or follow their path. When they measure you against standards that were never designed for your unique gifts. I paused, letting the words sink in. In those moments, remember, their assessment isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their perspective, limited by their experiences, their fears, their own definition of success. I moved back to center stage, voice growing stronger. You don't need to prove them wrong. You need to prove yourself right by creating something so aligned with your values, so expressive of your unique vision, so undeniably impactful that it expands their understanding of what's possible. The room had gone completely still, even the previously distracted students now fully present. That's not just how you transform your career or your relationships. That's how you transform the world, by bringing into existence possibilities others couldn't imagine until you showed them. After the presentation, I stayed to speak with students who lined up to ask questions. Some wanted practical advice about careers and business. Others shared personal stories of family expectations and the courage to chart their own course. A few just wanted to say thank you, their eyes shining with the recognition that comes when words articulate something you felt but couldn't express. As the line dwindled, I noticed Derek waiting patiently to the side, hands in pockets, watching the interactions with a thoughtfulness I was still getting used to seeing on his face. "That was impressive," he said when the last student had gone. "You had them completely engaged." "Thanks for coming," I replied. "I didn't expect to see you here." He shrugged, a gesture reminiscent of the brother I'd grown up with. "Wanted to see what all the fuss was about." The great Emily Parker, inspirational speaker. But the teasing had lost its edge, replaced by a warmth that felt new and fragile, but real. "Besides," he added, "I'm picking up Mom and Dad for dinner. Thought you might want to join us?" 6 months ago, such an invitation would have filled me with dread. The prospect of another evening being subtly diminished. Another performance of the family dynamics that had defined us for decades. Now I felt a quiet anticipation, a genuine desire to continue the careful rebuilding we'd begun. "I'd like that," I said. As we walked together toward the parking lot, I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, not just the professional achievements, though those had been significant, but the deeper transformation in how I understood success, relationships, and my own worth. I had entered this new chapter believing the goal was independence, freedom from my family's expectations, from my brother's judgment, from the limiting narratives of the past. What I'd discovered instead was the possibility of interdependence, relationships based not on control or comparison, but on mutual respect and the recognition of each other's unique contributions. "So," Derek said as we reached our cars, "I hear Horizon's looking at acquiring Tech Fusion. That's a big move into the AI space." I smiled, recognizing the olive branch for what it was, an acknowledgement of my place in the industry we both inhabited, an invitation to engage as equals. "Still in early discussions," I confirmed. "But yes, it's an exciting possibility. Their natural language processing could revolutionize our customer experience platforms." "If you want," he offered, "I could share some insights from our previous due diligence on their main competitor. Might give you a useful comparison point." "I'd appreciate that," I said, meaning it. As we drove separately to meet our parents, I reflected on how far we'd come, not just Derek and me, but all of us. My father, who now asked genuine questions about my work instead of dismissing it as a phase. My mother, who had begun to share her own quiet regrets about paths not taken, dreams deferred in service to convention. Derek, gradually shedding the armor of superiority that had protected him from his own doubts and fears. And me, learning that true independence wasn't about rejection or isolation, but about the freedom to choose connection on authentic terms. The restaurant my parents had chosen was quiet, elegant without being pretentious, a favorite spot for family celebrations over the years. As we gathered around the table, ordered drinks, fell into conversation that flowed more naturally than it had in decades, I watched these familiar faces with new eyes. My father, still imposing but softer somehow, the rigid certainty giving way to a more curious engagement with the world. My mother, more animated than I remembered, sharing stories from her volunteer work, with a passion that made me wonder what she might have created had she been encouraged to pursue her own path. Derek, still competitive, still driven, but more willing to acknowledge others' strengths, to collaborate rather than dominate. And me, no longer defining myself in opposition to them, no longer measuring my worth by their recognition or lack thereof, but able to be fully present, fully myself, in their company. "I have news," my father announced as dessert arrived. "I've decided to retire at the end of the year." We all turned to him in surprise. James Parker, retiring? The man who had built his identity around his work, who had measured his days by client meetings and deal closings, who had structured his entire value system around professional achievement? "It's time," he said, meeting each of our eyes in turn. "I've accomplished what I set out to do in my career. Now I want to focus on what I've neglected. Family, community, the foundation your mother and I have been talking about starting." "The Parker Foundation for Educational Access," my mother added, a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Supporting first-generation college students, especially young women interested in business and entrepreneurship." I felt a surge of emotion. Pride, yes, but also a profound sense of witnessing transformation in action. My father, redefining success at 60. My mother, finding expression for her values through philanthropic vision. Both of them expanding beyond the limitations of the roles they'd inhabited for decades. "That's wonderful," I said, reaching for my father's hand across the table. "Both of you will be incredible at this." "We're hoping you'll both be involved," my mother said, looking between Derek and me. "Your different perspectives, your different strengths, we need both to make this work." Derek caught my eye, a silent question passing between us. Could we do this? Collaborate not just professionally, but on a family legacy project. Navigate the complex history between us to build something meaningful together. I nodded slightly, and he returned the gesture. Yes, we could try. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside for a moment. "I was wrong," he said quietly, his hand on my shoulder. "For years I tried to protect you from failure by pushing you toward paths I understood. I couldn't see that what looked like rebellion was actually courage. The courage to follow your own vision even without a roadmap." I felt tears prick at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in this public place. My father wasn't a man given to emotional declarations or admissions of error. This moment, simple, honest, overdue, was its own kind of transformation. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." He nodded, squeezed my shoulder once more, then moved to join my mother by the door. Derek appeared at my side. "Ready to go?" I looked at my brother, this person who had been competitor, antagonist, and now potentially ally, and felt a surge of something like hope. Not that everything was resolved or that the patterns of a lifetime could be undone in 6 months, but that transformation was possible, ongoing, available to all of us if we had the courage to embrace it. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready." As we walked out into the cool evening air, the four of us moving together toward the parking lot, I thought about that dinner 6 months ago. The bitter words, the shock of the announcement, the fracturing and rebuilding that had followed. "You're nothing but worthless, dead weight." The words no longer had power to wound, not because they'd been disproven by external validation or professional achievement, though they had, but because I no longer measured my worth by others' assessment of it. Not even those closest to me, those whose opinions had once defined my sense of self. I had learned what true transformation requires. Not rejection of the past, but integration of it. Not independence from others, but authentic connection with them. Not external validation, but internal alignment between values and actions. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, hugs that felt warmer, more genuine than they had in years, I knew that the journey wasn't over. Transformation never is. There would be setbacks, moments of falling back into old patterns, challenges that would test our new understanding of each other. But we had begun, and beginning was often the hardest part. Driving home that night, the city lights blurring into streams of gold and silver against the darkness, I thought about all the versions of myself that had brought me to this moment. The eager student, the uncertain graduate, the determined entrepreneur, the overlooked daughter, the underestimated sister, the visionary partner. Each had played her part, Each had contributed something essential to who I was becoming. The woman who had once defined herself by what she was not conventional, not recognized, not valued, was becoming a woman defined by what she was creating. A career built on genuine innovation, relationships based on authentic connection, a life aligned with her deepest values. That was the most powerful transformation of all, from defining myself in opposition to others' expectations to defining myself through alignment with my own vision, from proving others wrong to proving myself right. As I pulled into my driveway, I thought about the young women I'd spoken to that day, their faces turned up toward me, their futures unwritten. I hoped they would remember not just the story of vindication, satisfying though it was, but the deeper truth beneath it. Your worth isn't determined by others, recognition of it. Your path isn't validated by others, understanding of it. Your success isn't measured by external markers, but by internal alignment between who you are, what you value, and what you create in the world. That alignment, that congruence between inner truth and outer expression, is the essence of transformation. Not changing who you are to fit others' expectations, but changing how you express who you are to create new possibilities for yourself and others. The brother who had called me worthless was now a potential ally in building something meaningful. The parents who had misunderstood my path were now supporters of my journey. The self that had once been defined by opposition was now defined by creation. That was the power of transformation, not rejection, but expansion, not either or, but both and, not limitation, but possibility. As I stepped into my home, I felt a profound sense of peace, not because everything was perfect or resolved, but because I was standing firmly in my truth, creating a life aligned with my values, inviting others to join me not through demand or expectation, but through the power of vision made manifest. The journey continued, the transformation evolved, and in that ongoing process, that daily recommitment to alignment between inner truth and outer expression lay the deepest fulfillment of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.